otaku teacher. Now, let's get one thing straight. We've all heard of these types of people, haven't we? The basement dwellers, the guys who never leave their basements or their rooms. The guys who, well, in some ways just don't have lives. Well, this is Japan's take on it, and you know what? I've got to give it a lot of credit where credit is due. It took something which was in some ways a serious subject, something about introverted personalities and being socially introverted, and turn it into a comedic tale of just one guy trying to do his own thing. So, yeah, in some ways that's kind of really clever.
You know, a lot has changed since I last made that video. I mean, we had a stable economy, Disney didn't own Fox, Nintendo was just getting out of its second dark period, and we didn't realize the hell we were about to go through for the next 5 or so years. But furthermore, I didn't realize at the time that there was going to be a larger variety of anime on the horizon. So today, I think I want to give a brief update to this list and talk about some of the animes that I've been actively watching since I last made it. Because it is important to understand how through these various means one could be exposed to new styles, story genres, and sometimes overall new franchises. So today, I want to list off my top 10 favorite animes that I've seen since 2017. Number 10. What's a greater way to kick off this list than with a 60s anime classic? Yes, to kick off this list, let's talk about the 1960s anime classic about a young racer on a journey to avenge the mysterious disappearance of his brother by racing in an endurance race around the world. On the surface, it's easy to understand, and the formula for the most part never gets too repetitive. On top of that, I also like the simple yet stylistic design of the series, wonderfully adapting the art style of the original creator Tatsuo Yoshida. To me, though, the biggest laugh the series gives me is with the original 1960s dub of the series for ABC. Now, I understand that anime dubbing during the 60s to the 90s is a lot different than how dubs are done. Trust me, there's another choice that may or may not be on this list that also had the same situation. But damn! You know they had exposition dumped constantly on the series just to keep the viewers informed about what the fuck was going on. Whether it's because of the simple formula or the laughably 60s era dubbing, Speed Racer will always be a winner in our number 10 spot. Number 9. Before I reveal what my number 9 choice is, I feel a small warning should be put in place. Let's talk about Uzaki-chan. Yeah, it seems like every year or so there's a new anime that gets released, becomes popular, and immediately deals with backlash from a section of the Twitter community. Whether it's complaining about out-of-context moments in a slice-of-life anime, like some we'll see later on down this list, or character designs meant to portray a character's cunningness and similarly their innocence, like of our number 9 pick, Uzaki-chan wants to hang out. Centering on the energetic, optimistic, sometimes sarcastic, overall good girl college student Hana Uzaki, she discovers through a bit of chance that the college she goes to is the same as her former upperclassman, Shinichi Sakurai. She soon discovers, however, that Shinichi has possibly become an introvert, and so, with all of her determination, Hana tries to improve Shinichi's life through various means of fun. I think for me, the reason I like this series is for something I like to call awkward humor. What I mean is, the show goes out of its way to make the situations Hana and Shinichi get into completely bizarre and sometimes very sexually tense. Whether it's a massage vibration machine at the mall or getting trapped in a bramble of bushes, the joke that's made in the situation is, boy, is that awkward to have an experience. A lot of series before and since have done this style of humor, but I think Uzaki-chan is one of the few who did it very well, and while she may be pissing off a good chunk of the Twitter users, her popularity in Japan has actually been a benefit to the Japanese Red Cross Association. Yes, the rage Twitter got into back in 2020 when Japan's Red Cross announced that they were going to be doing a blood drive tie with the recent hit manga series, eventually led to a brief drop of the tie-in. Note I said brief. Near the end of 2020, Japan's Red Cross reversed their decision and decided to do another version of the tie-in drive. While I don't know what the numbers were, I can say that this drive did bring more anime fans out to donate in exchange for a special otaku collectible. That's right, there is a good incentive. So is money too, though. Anyway, great comedy series, looking forward to season 2. Number 8. I already talked about a classic 60s anime series with Speed Racer, but what about an updated adaptation of a classic 60s tokusatsu series? Well, that's where our number 8 choice comes in with the 1992 to 1998 miniseries Giant Robo: The Day the Earth Stood Still. The string of 8, see what I did there? Hour-long specials are considered by some to be a perfect example of a proposed series that had good intentions gone wrong. One of the most notable things about this miniseries was the production schedule. Holy hell, this production would have put Spumco to shame. That's not to say it was all awful. The first 4 episodes of the miniseries were kept to their promised production time of 6 months each. However, following the 4th episode, the series began to take a little longer to produce than anticipated, with the time between episodes 4 and 5 being 9 months, as opposed to the proposed 6. To keep the fan base at bay while waiting for the next episode to be finished, the crew for the series quickly created special episodes to be released exclusive to home video, for the fans between the 9-month gaps of episodes. These would be known as the Gen Ray specials. These specials would take footage from the previously aired episodes and recut and dub them into a more DBZ abridged style, with an episode even parodying the entire genre of mech anime. OVA specials did help with keeping fan attention on the show, as the time taken between episodes 5 and 6 were also looking to be about 9 months. They unfortunately didn't produce any more OVA specials after episode 6. Sad, because the time it took for the last episode of the main series to be released was a lot longer than 9 months. It took 2.5 years. What happened was the studio was stuck working on other projects during the run of the miniseries, so with all these projects going on at the same time, the last episode of Giant Robo had to be put on hiatus. Which is a shame, because the crew really wanted to work and produce future Giant Robo miniseries specials. But with all the production issues that happened, it was never going to happen. Wow, I did all of that explaining for the series' history, but I never went over the reasons I like this. Alright, here they are. The overall production story behind this series is interesting, and trust me, this may not be the last time we have an interesting anime of an interesting production on this list. I also like the fact that the style for the series was purposely based on the style of the original mangas from the 60s, as well as the anime style for that era. And finally, I'm just gonna admit it, I like Jin Rei so much that honestly I'm regretting not putting her on my anime crushes list. An interesting miniseries reboot with an even more interesting production history behind it, Giant Robo: The Day the Earth Stood Still is ultimately deserving of that number 8 spot. Number 7. Alright, let's throw this back up here. Number 7 is a tie between 2 series that cover a similar subject matter, albeit from 2 completely different ends of the spectrum. Yes, I will be sad to admit this, but I did get into a few more, well, risque anime since 2016. Now, of course, I wouldn't stoop to the lowest levels of anime with hentai, but let's consider these 2 the closest I would ever get to that stage of depravity. The ties between the 2015 anime Shimoneta and the recently aired 2021 series Interspecies Reviewers. Both shows tackled the subjects of sex and lust, but they covered them in 2 completely different ways. With Shimoneta, the series is set in a post-apocalyptic utopia of Japan, with the caveat being that the teachings and thoughts of sex and lust have been outlawed by the Japanese government. So it's up to a small team of rebellious high schoolers to get the ideas of sexual thought back into society. All the while, our leads of the team, Tanukichi and Ayame, have to deal with the psychotically innocent girl Anna and her extremely strict parents who cause this outlawing of sexualization with their policies, with the threat of Anna's mother enforcing even more strict rules to combat the acts caused by Tanukichi and Ayame. Species Reviewers, on the other hand, holy shit. Alright, to start off with, we did nod this series back in Imported Monthly with a running subplot in the Fire Emblem Final Fantasy episode, so those who've been following the channel should know that I've known about this series since 2020. With that said, this series is fucking nuts. To start with, our plotline for the entire series centers on having a fantasy setting, but not focusing on the typical fantasy adventures. Instead, our main trio, Skunk, Zell, and Prim, task themselves with visiting every type of brothel in the village and reviewing every kind of succubus girl. Okay, before you assume I like this series as well as Shimonetta for what would be the obvious reasons, let me state that you are mostly incorrect. I like these shows for a couple reasons. The obvious doesn't even cross into my top 5 or so reasons I like this show. In fact, I actually put those reasons on the bottom most times when I bring this series up. No, the reason I like these shows are completely arbitrary from what would be the obvious. First, both shows have an interesting premise, with Shimonetta doing a post-apocalyptic utopia with an underlying problem revolving around the subject of sex. It's actually pretty poignant, especially with the idea that holding back perversion and sexual thoughts is what's keeping this utopia perfect, but also is what's slowly tearing it apart. And with interspecies reviewers, I like the notion that the series was setting the audience up for a typical fantasy adventure with the cast centering on a hunter, an elf, and a fallen angel. Then soon as episode 1, or well, chapter 1 of the manga starts, hits you over the head with the true premise, being a sex comedy centered instead on our trio being reviewers of succubus girls in a brothel district. That is hilarious. And with Shimonetta having a critical premise with sex jokes mixed in, these two can perfectly complement each other. Since we're on the subject of those jokes, they're for the most part very funny. Shimonetta's humor comes from, again, the idea of an awkward situation, with Anna going on a psychotically lustful rampage whenever she thinks about Tanukichi, going as far as giving him special cookies and water. If you don't get what I mean, I do recommend watching episode 4 of the series on Crunchyroll. Interspecies reviewers' humor, on the other hand, comes from the situations our trio find themselves in. Whether it's dealing with fire girls, clone girls, puppet girls, bird girls, gender bending — surprisingly this was the episode that made Funimation quit the simulcast of the series — mushroom girls, and elves. With most of these situations coming to Krim, as no one in the brothel district has ever dealt with an angel before. Let's just say they get a huge surprise for learning more about him. He has a large penis. Yup, the biggest revelation in the series is also one of its largest jokes in the series. Now, there is one more reason I want to bring up as to why I like these shows and have respect for them. They're covering the subject of sex in a time of need to discuss it. Alright, let me explain. Japan currently has been dealing with a huge drop in their birth rates amongst adults, and because the older generations of Japanese people are starting to really age at a rapid rate, there's been a fear that there won't be enough people born to make up for those deceased. This is often blamed by Japanese officials on young adults not wanting to leave their homes and socializing, becoming hikikimoris or hermits. So in an effort to push those who never left their homes' libidos, the Japanese broadcasters have allowed for newer Japanese shows and animes to push the envelope a little bit more on how much risque material they can get away with. However, the honest reason that is never considered is that the real reason the birth rate has been so low is because young people in Japan have mostly been overworked and thus are too exhausted to actually go out and be social. So the idea of a late night anime that could push the envelope to present a message to their audience to be more, well, active, is something that will impose on good intentions, somewhat miss the overall problem with modern Japanese working class. Overall, these are still two funny, poignant, and overall interesting series that tried to tackle a situation whose problem was larger than expected. Number 6. Now let's talk about a cult classic 90s kids anime that made it to my number 6 spot. On the surface, the series Samurai Pizza Cats is nothing really special, just a humorous 90s kids anime that lasted one 52-episode season. What I really like about this show is the humor. To understand what I mean, let's discuss a quick notion of the dub. Dubbing foreign shows like live-action dramas, action shows, and animes often require the licensor of the dubbing release to be given access to everything story-related for the show, like scripts, character bibles, to understand the situations being presented, and thus be able to present the situation to a new audience getting the dubbed version, so that they can understand what the show wants to tell. So why did I just go through all of that? Well, because when the company Saban got the US licensing rights to the Japanese anime Kyato Ninten Diandi in 1991, they were only given the episode tapes. Yeah, no script, no character bibles. The crew at Saban dubbing the series had to figure out everything on their own, and thus decided screw it, and made the show a self-referential pop culture of the 90s spewing comedy. Yeah, Saban literally yelled fuck it and decided to just do whatever the hell they found funny with the series. This ranged from episodes having self-deprecating humor to self-referential humor to their constant reuse of scenes, plots, and villains, to just simply pop culture references of the early 90s. I mean, they gave the main villain of the show the voice of 60s comedian Paul Lynde. For those who don't know, Paul Lynde was a comedian during the 60s and 70s, best known for his work on the classic sitcom Bewitched and the hit game show Hollywood Squares. These kind of jokes were everywhere, and dubbing teams knew how to balance them out through the 52 episodes they produce. The only unfortunate thing about this series is that the premiere was delayed due to a lack of interest in anime at the time in America. The show wouldn't get released in the US until 1996, following the success of Deke's dub of Sailor Moon. In the end, the series is hands down one of my favorite lost 90s animes, one that didn't get its dues at the time, and for the most part could be considered the first ever official abridged dub. And all because the crew were not given the necessary materials needed to do a proper translation. This series is definitely deserving of its number 6 spot. Number 5. We finally hit the top 5, and for our number 5 spot, I went with a little magical comedy that released a while back that I got into because of the reviews covering it and gushing over how good of a series it was. Yes, Little Witch Academia is one of those shows that I've heard so much praise about being passed around that I eventually decided to give it a watch, and yeah, it was a load of fun. Taking a spin from the premise of fantasy books like Harry Potter, Little Witch Academia centers on a human in training to be a witch named Atsuko and her friends Latte, and the main reason I put this show on the list. Yeah, without a doubt, Susie alone is the reason I really like this show. A sarcastic, cynical witch who befriends Atsuko and Latte just for the laughs of it. And that, for the most part, is the reason I like the series. The comedy, and Susie, for the most part, being much of that comedy, with Atsuko's clumsiness and naivete often bringing the other most out of the series. The last thing I can discuss is the animation. My god, this animation is beautiful. This was done by Studio Trigger, and it shows. Trigger is often best at snappy action scenes and choices in color and shading. But what Trigger should also be known for with this series is their expressions. And I don't mean their serious action scene expressions on characters. I mean their comedic expressions they give to their characters. Whether they're falling or tripping or just reacting to something out of the ordinary, no doubt there will be a perfect expression to match that situation. So yeah, the overall animation and the antics of Susie are the reasons I like Little Witch Academia and put it on this list. Well, alright. I will be honest, I haven't seen a whole lot of it, and truth be told, it was a toss-up between this and High Guardian Spice, so I went with the safer option. Number 4. Alright, for my number 4 choice, I don't want to give away so much because I do plan on covering this series in an upcoming episode, so I'm going to give the most basic rudimentary description and reason for this particular 70s anime to be my number 4 pick. Yes, for my number 4 pick, we go once again back to the vault of classic animes from the 60s and 70s to choose a series that was rather popular at the time, but has since been kind of forgotten to the animes of that era. Mojoku Megochan is a series that, while considered at this point a long-forgotten anime series of the 1970s, was, and still is in a way, for the most part, an influential anime series in how it inspired future anime shows that would come out during the 80s and 90s. Once again, though, I didn't want to give too much away, so let's leave it at that and talk about the plot. The series centers around a teenage witch named Meg, and call this a brainer jokes you want, trust me, we'll get to this later, who is sent to Earth to train and build her magic abilities so that one day she can save her home dimension. Again, I will talk more about the series in detail in a future video this season, but to get across what I like about the series. Well, to start, I like the art style of the series. Yeah, Mojoku Megochan has a very stylized look for a show of the 1970s. The style was able to work, though, with the limited animation styling of that era, similar in a way to Speed Racer. Not bad for a show from Toei Animation. Oh yeah, this was a production of Toei from the 70s, you know, before they were best known for a certain team of Super Saiyans. On top of that, the music in this series kicks. While I can't play the track because of, you know, copyright, seriously, when this episode is over, look up the intro on YouTube, it's seriously good. Plus, the animation for the intro is also amazing, and can be seen as somewhat memorable. Again, I don't really want to give too much away because of work on a future episode, but yeah, Mojoku Megochan is definitely underrated and deserves this number 4 spot. Number 3. Let's talk about Pop Team Epic. It's interesting to think that over the last 70 years, Japanese television has been known for a couple of things, whether it's anime, drama, or even tokusatsu. But one style of TV that gets overlooked from Japan is variety. That's where Pop Team Epic came in to redefine the meaning of variety. Being based on a gag strip manga, Pop Team Epic ran for one season in 2018 with 2 additional specials in 2019. This series is fucking insane, with skits ranging from 15 seconds to 2 minutes, covering a variety of topics. Each episode literally has no base subject for the skits they present. 1 minute you could be getting a skit about Popko being late for school, and the next minute you could be given a parody of a video game. Some of the animation is on model, and sometimes the animation just goes bizarre.
For me, the best thing about this show is its format.
Despite being scheduled as a 30-minute show, Pop Team Epic is actually 15 minutes.
So if it's 15 minutes and it's scheduled for a 30-minute slot, then what does the show do with the remaining 15 minutes? Fill up another episode like what American short shows do? Nope. They run the episode again, but with a twist.
The repeated episodes air with different casts for the leads. Yep, every second airing of the episode switches up the casting of Papako and Pipami between a male cast and a female cast, with the added benefit of these alternate releases having alternate lines for some skits.
So in the end, all of these elements make up a show that has no rhyme or reason, making it perfect for the number 3 spot.
Number 2.
So if you haven't guessed by now, I like slice of life animes for the most part, but I think I should make an emphasis on what kind of slice of life animes I actually like. No, not that kind. What I'm talking about is slice of life shows that can have a good hook to them. For example, Yasuri Yatsura is a slice of life show that has a hook with the involvement of aliens and other sci-fi elements, whereas something like another anime series that may or may not be covered on this list is a slice of life hook involving a certain mystical creature. Well, for my number 2 pick, I'm going with a school slice of life series that centers on a particularly well-known hook to many Japanese audiences: Japanese folklore. That show is Interviews with Monster Girls.
Yes, like most slice of life animes, Interviews with Monster Girls at first presents itself as a simple slice of life show centered on a biology teacher named Tetsuo, who wants to learn more about demi-humans, a subversion of humans based on Japanese folklore, who are actually being slowly accepted into society. It so happens that Tetsuo has 3 demi-humans in his class: Hikari, Kyoko, and Yugi. Along with their succubus teacher named Saki, the group try to learn and better understand and help each other.
With a plot like that, the characters were made to fill a series of roles that traditional slice-of-life series would have, like the wisecracking smartass, the hopeless romantic in love, the shy one, the obvious love interest, and our straight man to the entire scenario. Every anime's done that, but with the added twist of being creatures based on Japanese folklore, this one does a take on the premise the best.
In the end, I do think this was an underrated series when it was released, being overshadowed by another anime series that tackled the subject of mystical creatures.
Also, Kyoko was my favorite, no reason, just wanted to get that out there. Regret not putting her on the anime crushes list.
And before we get to our number 1 pick, here are a few honorable mentions. Godzilla Land, an interesting part of the overall franchise for the kaiju series from the early 90s centered on kids. In all honesty, the reason this one was put on the list was for the overall character designs and rocking 90s soundtrack. Astro Boy, another classic anime from the 60s. This choice was tough though, as it was also split between the 60s version and the later 80s reboot. Both adapted their stories well and made use of their animation at the time, with the 60s dealing with the limited nature of television animation, and the 80s reboot serving as a nice update with the 80s animation styles and techniques. KO Century Beast Warriors, a lost relic of the action-adventure comedy animes of the late 80s and early 90s. This one honestly didn't come to me until I was recording a Let's Play session and brought up the band who did the soundtrack for the first run of episodes. What else can I say? A great style and a great first theme to boot. This is a lost gem that needs to be remembered more. Soul Eater. This one has been one I've been getting into recently, but I honestly can't find a real reason right now to explain why I like it. Maybe it's just because of Blair. Those character styles are really well done. Gunsmith Cats, an absolute classic of the 90s, but I haven't seen much of it to give it a determination. Just more characters I regret not putting on the anime crushes list. Nichio, a slice-of-life comedy about a gang of high school girls dealing with the absurdities of everyday teen life in Japan. It's funny, it's stylistic, it has adorable moments just as much as gut-bustingly humorous moments. I just couldn't find a reasonable enough spot to put it on the list. Cutie Honey, another classic anime series from the 70s. Between this series and Mojoku Megochan, it was a difficult choice to make. In fact, at one point both series were on the list as a tie, but the more I thought about it, I realized that I like Megu-chan more. It's not to say that Cutie Honey is bad, it still has great character designs for the 70s, booted exceptionally well with a soundtrack to boot. Flint the Time Detective, Another choice that was close to being on the list, especially when I almost decided to tie it with Samurai Pizza Cats. The more I thought about this series, however, I realized that there wasn't that much I really liked. The premise is good, a gang of time-traveling detectives going through time to solve mysteries, and a villain that I had listed in my top 5 anime crushes. Don't Toy With Me, Miss Nagatoro. A series similar to Uzaki-chan, this series also tackles the subject of social outcasts, but whereas Uzaki took the approach and utilized a more well-meaning series of events kind of scenario, Miss Nagatoro went for a more mean-spirited approach. Now, to be fair, sometimes a little dark humor or embarrassment humor is okay. This show displays how it could be done. So why didn't it appear on the list? Well, maybe because I still respected Uzaki's approach just a little bit more. That's not to say I really hated Nagatoro and only placed it on this list due to the similarities. It just means both take their subjects and present them well, even if they're through different means. Galaxy High. I don't want to talk about the series too much, mainly because I might cover it in a future video, but the series is rather unique as it was one of the first American commissioned anime series to be produced, and I think that's very fascinating. Like I said though, I want to cover this series in a future video, so there'll be more about this series in the future. Detective Conan. Another series that I've gotten into recently. This long-running anime has a very in-depth narrative throughout its 25-year run. The characters can be really funny, and the art style is one that I have to give credit where credit is due when implementing a simple yet tough style. I even had a hard time cracking this one down for thumbnails on Game-O-Rama Uncut. And finally, High Guardian Spice. I honestly wanted to put this one on the list mainly because I feel like the series had great potential, but for some reason the crew just couldn't pull together an engaging overarching story, taking elements from Little Witch Academia, making another slice-of-life anime that goes serious quick. If I really had to explain what made me want to put this series on the list, it was for the character of Snapdragon. This character has a very nice storyline that felt fleshed out, and to be honest, it felt obvious that she should have been the lead character instead of Rosemary. And my number one favorite currently viewing anime is...
If you couldn't figure this one out by now, then wow. I don't know what else to say. It was all laid right out here on the table. Also,
yes, as an absolute non-shock to everyone, my favorite currently viewing anime has been Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid. Being a slice-of-life anime with a hook, you all know I like those types of stories. This series has been telling us the hilariously sweet story of a dragon who fell in love with a human and became a maid for nearly 10 years now. Starting as a manga series in 2014, Miss Kobayashi's Dragon Maid tells the story of an overworked and alcoholic computer programmer named Kobayashi, who through a series of events finds herself coming face to face with a dragon girl named Toru, early one morning. Feeling bad for her and the dilemma she started, Kobayashi lets Toru stay with her as her maid. Now the two of them must deal with the absurdities of everyday life with the help of their friends. This right here to me is a perfect premise for an anime series. It doesn't start off with any grand stakes, and even then, when it does hit its grand stakes moments, they handle it with a certain level of justification and seriousness it deserves. Whether it's dealing with a dragon hunter or Toru's own father. Another thing I really like about the series is the comedy. Holy hell, this series is hilarious. It blends a good mix of wordplay, slapstick, dark comedy, and my constant favorite, awkward humor, with most of that coming from the scenes between Shota and my favorite character.
and not for the reasons you think, sicko.
Lukuwa. At the same time, the series can also give us some heartwarming moments, like Kobayashi letting Kana stay with them, some scenes in the final episode of Season 1, the ending of the Valentine's Day special, and the biggest moment for me, Lukuwa telling Shota her biggest weakness and fear in Season 2. This moment has been so ingrained in my mind that I actually screenshotted a text quote of the speech Lukuwa gives to preserve the thought and the feeling, as it can be relatable to many. And I think that's what really draws me into this show, is the relatability. A show can have a great art style and characters, great music, and a good premise, but when a show can't find a moment or two to present a feeling of relatability for the viewer that may be watching, that's what'll make it good, but sometimes not memorable. Yeah, the premise is out there, but when you take away the hook and simplify it, you get the basic story of people dealing with unexpected changes and how it can better them in the long run.
Now, regarding the controversies that the series gets on Twitter, well, on the one hand, I want to agree and say that there are some jokes and moments that are quite, well, questionable. But on the other hand, I think those who have never ever seen this show had not picked up on the known fact that the series centers on characters that are essentially fish out of water.
That's what people seem to forget. The dragons came from an alternate dimension, a dimension of medieval and Renaissance that never ended, and fantasy characters like dragons roam the land. so they have no idea of social norms. Remember, it took Toru nearly an entire season to get a full grasp on being a human, and with Kana about the same time, but also factoring in the realization that she's also a child and children can be weird.
In the end, despite the controversies the series gets itself into, it to me will be one of my favorites of all time, next to Cowboy Bebop.
It perfectly amalgamated all of the qualities I listed off through this list: a good balance of story with a good hook, good comedy by throwing in various elements like random and awkward humor to balance out the wordplay and slapstick, great music, awesome designs that can be seen as simple yet difficult, an overall relatable message to wrap up what should be a must-watch for any slice-of-life anime fan, and my number one favorite currently viewing anime, if you can get through the what the fuck moments.
Now, if you excuse me, I think I'm going to start working on the updated version of this list for 2028. They made a sequel to this series?
Kokoro